Welcome to a Between Bites Piecemeal episode. Piecemeal is a podcast hosted by the Emily Program, and Between Bites are short episodes addressing topics you want to know more about. Piecemeal covers topics related to eating disorders, body image, and how society may influence our thinking. Please use your discretion when listening and reach out for support as needed. I'm your host, Jillian Lampert, and for Between Bites, you get just me. Welcome. Today's topic is focused on eating disorders and disabilities. Why do we need to think about the intersection of eating disorders and disabilities? We're going to dive into that, as well as ways we can improve visibility, access, and inclusivity in care. So let's start by thinking about eating disorders and disabilities, this topic that we might not think a lot about. First, we need to acknowledge that we don't know as much as we need to know about the relationship between eating disorders and disabilities. And we also need to acknowledge the ableist perspective that most treatment is designed upon, as well as the limitations in our understanding of the myriad of ways that we can do better. The intersection of eating disorders and disabilities is likely influenced by a slew of factors like disability, visibility or invisibility, food access, ableism, discrimination related to ableism, mobility concerns, feeding difficulties, appearance and weight discrimination and stigma, and so much more. We also need to highlight that some of our systems have supports for people with disabilities, but often disability isn't thought about with people with eating disorders, and vice versa. Often eating disorders aren't thought about in a population of folks with disabilities. So I want to really set that stage as we think about this together for a few minutes. And we know that when it comes to disability, there's also some folks who have a disability really because of the eating disorder. So someone with an eating disorder can have a disability if the eating disorder substantially limits one or more of their major life activities. And eating, feeding, moving the body, those are major life activities that are significantly impacted in an eating disorder. So that's another piece to think about. Somebody may not have a disability outside of the eating disorder, but the eating disorder itself can be seen as a disability. So let's frame all of this. How many people are we talking about? An estimated 16% of people, that's about 1.8 billion people worldwide, about 16% of people report having a disability. And with 9% of the population experiencing an eating disorder, it's a significant proportion of people with disability will also experience an eating disorder. And folks with disabilities are a significant proportion of the population of folks with an eating disorder. So we need to really acknowledge this is a significant portion of our population that we may or may not be thinking about. And when it comes to how we want to be thinking about it from a care perspective, sort of with my Emily Program care provider hat on, inclusive care needs to break down the barriers to treatment and provides adequate supports, enabling more people to get help, right? Enabling more people to receive support and adequate interventions. So we know that the limited data on the intersection of disability and eating disorders describes some vulnerabilities that may disproportionately put people with disabilities at risk for an eating disorder or disordered eating. So we know that research indicates that people who are dependent on others for movement, lifting, transport, and or other physical supports may feel or get the message that they are more easily helped if they are lighter or smaller, and they may adjust their eating accordingly. We know that when we decrease our food intake or substantially change our eating patterns, some of us are at high risk for developing disordered eating or an eating disorder. So if the person with a disability, a physical disability impacting their mobility, believes that they would be better or more easily cared for if they were lighter or smaller, it may be really impactful to how they think about self-care and activities of daily living, like moving, eating, toileting, bathing, and more. So additionally, on top of that, we want to think about body image or body esteem concerns and or stigma that can contribute to disordered eating. And often people with disabilities experience body esteem concerns or stigma in a world with so many messages about social value being tied to body appearance and ability. And while those are the same kinds of things that can trigger eating disorders in other people, we really need to think about them within this unique framework of disability, ability, and we need to think about them really carefully for folks who also have a disability. And then when we think about treatment is critical and appropriate care is essential for everybody. And we know that we're not, as a healthcare system, we know that we're not meeting the needs of everybody and that not everybody can access the treatments that are available. And as we continue to try to improve that, we need to continue to focus on the really direct experience of the people in front of us. We need to ask questions to know what appropriate care looks like for any given person. Care might look the same or different for someone with a disability. Treatment programs do make lots of accommodations. At the Emily program, we made lots of accommodations for people with a range of unique needs, and that's really important. Treatment programs need to make accommodations of many kinds to meet the unique needs of the people they care for. And someone with a disability may need specific interventions or supports in order to even access eating disorder care or to access it fully. Sometimes those needs can be well met in an in-person treatment setting, and sometimes the virtual care setting can make treatment accessible in meaningful ways that somebody might experience a limitation that's really hard to overcome in an in-person treatment setting. And it's also really important to consider the wide range of things that people experience and that contribute to any one person's identity and experience. And we can only know those things by asking questions, by being curious, being non-judgmental, listening deeply, and then responding the best we can to meet the needs of the person right in front of us. So we think about this at the Emily program in a number of ways. Individualized treatment planning is happens for everybody, but individualized treatment planning for somebody who also has a disability really needs to address both eating disorder recovery and support for any disability related needs. The training of staff needs to include disability awareness, inclusive communication, and supports that are available in the program and outside of the program to meet the needs of this individual in front of you. There's a lot of physical environment considerations. How are the facilities laid out? What are the expectations of movement throughout the facility? What does access look like for everyone? What limitations exist and how might they be overcome or modified? And there are all kinds of facility regulations and requirements for access. And sometimes even those aren't enough to help people to fully access. So as treatment providers, we really need to think about how does this building that I'm standing in right now present for somebody with any kind of unique need, and to really think through how we might be able to move people through the facility in a way that works well for them. When it comes to treatment planning, so treatment planning, sort of laying out what's going to happen, how will that look? We really need to have that whole person perspective when co-designing treatment plans with people who receive care. Co-designing a treatment plan is really important for everybody, but particularly key in assessing and addressing any unique needs of someone who also has a disability. And so again, it gets back to that questioning, curiosity, deep listening to really understand what somebody needs in front of us. And then community resource connection, because at the Emily program, we may not be able to do all of the things that somebody needs, but we also need to be able to understand what they need and try best we can to link them to services beyond our areas of expertise so that the person in front of us can get that whole person care. So I want to close by encouraging us to think about the many ways we don't think about people and their unique needs. When we think about eating disorders, we really need to expand our idea of eating disorders, continue to expand our idea of, in our awareness of who gets eating disorders and what people need in terms of treatment and support and recovery. We know that we're all still learning, and we certainly are committed to expanding our awareness and ability to serve a widening array of people with eating disorders who need support. We think a lot about that at the Emily program, but we need to think about it as a whole community. How do we all think more inclusively? How do we all think more critically? How do we all think about who might not be able to access something that other people can, and why not? So together, if we do that, we can really help move the field forward, and we can make care more inclusive, and most importantly, we can make eating disorder recovery more accessible. So if you are struggling with an eating disorder and also have a disability, please reach out for help and know that the person on the other end of that phone or that web form, if you're doing it online, really wants to help and will keep in mind and take into account your unique needs. They should do that as they're listening to you. And we really want to keep that in mind as we continue to evolve and grow. So I hope that you'll join us in that learning process. And I also hope that if you have a topic you'd like us to talk about on Piecemeal, that you will let us know. If you enjoyed today's episode of Piecemeal, please subscribe, rate, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Learn more about us at emilyprogram.com. Find us on social media. Piecemeal is produced by the amazing podcast team at the Emily Program. Until next time, take care. Thanks for listening.